The doorbell rang while I was still standing in my socks among half-opened moving boxes. And when I pulled the door wide, Grant Ellison was already there. He carried a gray folder under one arm, looked past me at the apartment like he was measuring structural damage, and said, "I run a company worth $280 million. Then he held my gaze without blinking and finished. "If you say yes, we'll be at King County Courthouse by 9 tomorrow morning." Like marriage was a filing deadline. I stepped aside because shock moves faster than judgment, and Grant walked straight to my kitchen counter, setting down the folder beside a box of mismatched plates. On top was a wire transfer receipt showing $185,000 sent from Northline Outdoor Systems to a vendor I had never heard of. But the signatory line read Cole Danner. Under it sat the property agreement my ex-husband had begged me to sign, and this time the attached quitclaim page was visible. My electronic signature sitting under language that stripped my claim from the townhouse. I touched the timestamp first because that was how my mind worked. And the filing date landed exactly 3 hours before Cole texted that he was trying to save us. Grant watched me read without interrupting, then said Mallory Pike had not slept with Cole by accident. She had used him because he understood freight billing, shell vendors, and plausible invoice language. I turned the page, found the matching vendor registration under Cole's consulting entity, and asked the only question that mattered. "Are you offering access or staged access?" "Everything," he said, and when I did not answer quickly enough, he pulled out one more sheet showing Northline's outside counsel had already prepared emergency authorization papers. If he was lying with documents, board contacts, and a tax exposure summary attached. And that made the proposition feel less insane than my marriage had. I picked up a pen from the counter, circled Cole's name on the transfer log, looked at Grant, and said yes, because by then the evidence had already made the decision for me. The civil ceremony at King County Courthouse lasted 11 minutes, with 2 strangers from the hallway signing as witnesses while Grant stood beside me in the same dark coat. The clerk slid the license across a scuffed counter. I signed Ivy Prescott Ellison without pausing, and the whole thing felt less like romance than emergency stabilization. Outside on the courthouse steps, I photographed the certificate against the wet stone rail, sent it to Cole, and wrote, "You are not the only one who knows how to use a courthouse before lunch." Northline's headquarters sat in Sodo behind smoked glass and brushed steel doors, the kind of building designed to look calm while money moved hard inside it. Grant took me straight through reception, stopped in front of a silent semicircle of department heads, and introduced me without performance. "This is Ivy Ellison, interim head of Special Financial Review." No one asked questions, but several people looked at my courthouse band, then at Grant, then back at the memo already appearing in their inboxes. The first person who chose resistance was Brooke Harlan, Northline's director of vendor operations, who folded her arms before I even reached her desk. She glanced at the authorization memo, pushed her reading glasses up, and said certain credential changes still required Mallory Pike's approval, as if procedure could outlive the paper already in my hand. I placed outside counsel's emergency access letter on top of her keyboard, watched her read the signature block twice, and answered that IT could change the tokens with her cooperation or without it. Within 72 hours, I had 3 secure folders open on dual monitors, vendor contracts on the left, marketing retainers in the center, freight correction invoices on the right. The pattern surfaced fast because fraud likes repetition, and Brooke's team had coded the same false services under different labels while preserving identical formatting errors across supposedly unrelated vendors. One invoice billed Northline for seasonal expansion support on a Tuesday night, when Cole had texted me he was stuck reviewing warehouse discrepancies, and the timestamp on the PDF matched his vendor portal login exactly. Grant moved through those first days without crowding me, leaving coffee beside my keyboard, signing every release I marked, and opening the family office server when I requested parallel household records. That mattered because the badge logs, contract archives, and banking permissions kept matching what he had promised at my kitchen counter, which was more consistency than I had seen from a husband in years. By the end of the third night, with the building mostly dark and one desk lamp burning over a stack of reconciled invoices, I had traced more than $1.1 million and knew I was only looking at the first layer. I called the finance and operations meeting at 9, spread 12 flagged invoices across the conference table, and told everyone the amnesty window closed at noon. Anyone who brought me original files, side emails, or approval notes before then could keep their position if outside counsel cleared them. But altered records meant referral. No one interrupted because the papers in front of them already showed duplicate service language, identical PDF metadata, and Brooke Harlan's approval chain stamped across 6 months. At 10:14, one of the junior analysts Brooke had shut down twice in prior meetings sent me an internal message asking whether immunity covered coding changes requested by leadership. 15 minutes later, she and an accounts coordinator were standing in my office with printed invoice packets they had quietly saved after noticing the same service descriptions recur. One packet tied 3 unrelated vendors to the same billing phone number, and the other showed Northline paying market readiness fees for projects that had never existed. I built the first layer before lunch, drawing clean lines from Northline disbursements to shell vendors and then into an account Cole controlled through a consulting entity he had hidden. The second layer took longer because Mallory had broken her withdrawals into smaller personal transfers. But the destination accounts gave her away through jewelry charges and retreat deposits. By 2, the affair had stopped looking private and started reading like infrastructure. Because every false invoice I matched had a corresponding lie from my marriage sitting beside it. Brooke Harlan came in next without being summoned, shut my office door carefully, and set down a yellow legal pad filled with dates, vendor codes, and override instructions. She tried to begin with. I didn't know the scale, but I turned the pad toward the light where her initials matched the override entries, and she stopped. Then she admitted Mallory had supplied alternate coding language while Cole emailed invoice wording from a private account, and the room went completely still after that. That afternoon, Grant's family lawyer filed emergency motions in the divorce case to restrict further transfers out of marital holdings, and I read the stamped copies before saving them. The filing mattered because Mallory had already shifted company money into personal spending, and once the restraints were in place, any fresh movement became easier to freeze. Grant left the papers by my keyboard with 2 coffees and no speech attached, and I trusted the gesture because the case number, filing time, and signed verification were real. Cole called 7 times that night, and I let each voicemail transcribe itself before listening. The software stacking his panic into timestamps and clipped admissions I could actually use. The first message accused me of being manipulated. The fourth asked what Grant had promised me, and the last one asked whether we could still fix this privately. I exported every file into a folder labeled Witness Conduct, attached the call logs, and saved the transcript package because his voice had finally started giving me evidence instead of excuses. Near midnight, I ran one more reconciliation and found a string of freight correction charges routed through a vendor whose registration used the same recovery email as Cole's side business. That was when I knew the loss would climb past the $1.1 million I had already traced. Because the hidden entries clustered around quarter-close dates, I finished the schedule, ate the soup Grant had left while it was still barely warm, and understood from the clean repetition of those dates that someone inside was preparing a larger move. The confirmation arrived the next morning in a forwarded message from one of the analysts who had decided survival mattered more than silence. Mallory had scheduled an emergency meeting with Connor Vale and the private credit group for Friday afternoon, framing it as a governance crisis caused by Grant's judgment. I read the subject line twice, saw my own courthouse marriage folded into her narrative, and understood she was done moving money because now she meant to kill the audit. By noon, a business gossip site had posted a grainy crop of our courthouse certificate under a headline about Northline's unstable leadership and Grant's impulsive personal choices. The language was cheap, but the damage was precise, because Connor's fund did not care about dignity, only governance risk, lender exposure, and headlines. Mallory was not trying to outrun the evidence I had built. She was trying to make the evidence look contaminated by me before anyone important finished reading it. She called my direct line at 117, and the first thing I heard was not panic but amusement, the kind that comes from someone still convinced control is reversible. She did not deny sleeping with Cole, did not deny the vendors, did not even bother performing outrage. She only said he had been useful. Then she turned colder and said, "You married a stranger for access," as if that sentence erased the transfer logs, the matching metadata, and the handwritten override notes Brooke had placed on my desk. I let her finish because interrupting would have wasted material, and when the line finally opened, I looked at Brooke's initials on the legal pad and answered from there. I told her the vendor matrix already tied her coding language to Cole's invoice drafts. The personal transfers already tied her accounts to company disbursements, and the restraining motions were already filed. She went quiet for one beat, then said Connor Vale would still side with her, because finance men forgive fraud much faster than they forgive the smell of disorder. That part landed because by 2, Connor's office had sent a careful email saying he was considering a temporary governance realignment to protect lender confidence at Northline. If he backed Mallory's version, Grant could lose operational control long enough for my access to be challenged, Brooke's system trail to be diluted, and every document buried in procedure. I walked the email into Grant's office, set it beside the stamped family court filings and the reconciliation schedule, and said we did not need a better story. Only the right pages in the right order. Grant read the email once, then reached for the thin packet I had already assembled from the transfer map, the metadata match sheet, the preservation notices, and the tax exposure summary. Nothing in it was emotional, which was exactly why it carried weight. Because Connor did not need to like me, only to fear the liability of standing beside Mallory. By the time I left Grant's office, false victory had changed shape in my hands. Because the danger was real now, printed clearly in Connor Vale's language. And that meant I finally had something concrete enough to break. Connor Vale received me at 11 with the packet already in front of him, my transfer map clipped over the governance email his office had sent the day before. He opened by saying he did not care about personal scandal, only whether Northline's leadership had become too unstable to protect lender confidence and portfolio exposure. I slid the metadata match sheet over his polished table, pointed to the identical embedded author tags across 3 fake vendors, and told him instability was not the marriage. It was the fraud. He read more slowly after that, especially when he reached the preservation notices and the tax exposure summary that tied Mallory's personal accounts back to company disbursements. I did not ask him to trust me, because the packet already carried Brooke Harlan's override trail, the vendor phone number overlap, and the family court restraints filed the day before. By the time he reached the last page, he no longer sounded impatient, only careful, and he said his fund would not support any governance change while documented financial misconduct remained unresolved. Back at Northline, Brooke tried to resign by email before lunch, but IT had already restricted her session based on the access controls I authorized the night before. She appeared in my doorway 10 minutes later with mascara smudged under one eye and a portable hard drive in her hand, gripping it like it still contained leverage. I set Connor's follow-up email on the desk where she could read the sentence confirming his withdrawal, then waited until the meaning of it reached her face. That was when she finally gave me the piece she had been saving for herself, a local backup of vendor drafts, approval notes, and billing templates she kept in case Mallory ever blamed her. The drive showed Cole's private account sending invoice language, Mallory revising line items, and Brooke executing the coding changes after hours through remote login sessions. I copied everything to evidence storage while she signed a statement for outside counsel. and once her signature hit the page, the silence inside the building changed. Mallory moved next, and exactly the way panicked people with status always do. By cutting the weakest partner loose and pretending the collapse had his fingerprints alone. Cole started calling before she finished, his messages arriving fast enough to overlap. First angry, then pleading, then so frightened he could barely land a sentence. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near University Village because by then I had Connor's email. Brooks Drive, and enough paper in my bag to let him understand how small his options had become. He looked wrecked before I even sat down, but I did not offer softness because the screenshot of his vendor login from the fake freight correction invoice sat on top of my folder. I slid across a cooperation outline prepared by counsel and told him one path led through full disclosure, asset assignment, and a truthful statement while the other left him alone with Mallory's version. He stared at the page, glanced at the login record with his email attached, and asked what I got out of helping him. So I told him I got the money back faster and the truth cleaner. That answer broke something practical in him, which was better than breaking something emotional, because practical men confess when the arithmetic turns against them. He signed the statement, wrote down the password to a cloud folder holding the split spreadsheets, and admitted Mallory had approved every draft before funds moved. When I left the coffee shop, I called Grant from the parking lot, told him we had Brooks' backup and Cole's cooperation, and heard his exhale go quiet on the line. Everything accelerated after that because the network had stopped presenting a unified front and started feeding on itself, each person handing over just enough to save themselves first. Outside counsel locked the vendor accounts. The bank freeze held. Mallory retained criminal defense. And the gossip coverage flipped from reckless marriage to executive fraud exposure within hours. I was still holding the same thin folder when I got back to Northline, but now it contained Connor's withdrawal, Brooks' signed statement, and Cole's password written in his own hand, which was all the proof I needed that the trap had finally started closing from the inside. Mallory was charged within the month. Brooke lost her position, and Cole entered cooperation after counsel delivered his records. Passwords. Statement into federal hands directly. The townhouse papers Cole pushed across our kitchen table were unwound in civil filings, and the money he helped move started coming back to Northline. By then, Northline's books were clean, the vendor channels were sealed, and the gossip cycle had turned on Mallory hard enough to finish the indictment. I moved into a new townhouse with blue dishes in the cabinets, one lamp by the window, and no paperwork anywhere waiting to trick me. The first full night I slept there, my phone stayed dark until morning, and that silence felt earned because every loose end had already closed. Grant never gave me a speech about fate. He just slid a formal CFO offer across the counter and asked which name I wanted displayed. I signed that letter with the same steady hand I had used at the courthouse. Except this time, the document widened my life for once. When I told Grant I was staying, he only nodded, set the Riverside projections beside my coffee, and said, "Good. Those margins are your work." I laughed because that was the closest thing to romance he had ever offered me, and because, after everything, it was exactly what I trusted. If this story stayed with you, thank you for listening, because some endings do not arrive soft. They arrive documented, paid back, and finally quiet. I know now that peace can sound like a clean ledger, a locked door, and someone beside you who never asks you to shrink. If you have ever rebuilt your life after trust broke in your hands, stay with me here, because calm can still be a love story.